ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your hats because we are about to dive deep with the one and only Patri Friedman, a libertarian anarcho-capitalist theorist, and as rumor has it, a man who's trying to colonize the seven seas. So he's really the founder of the Seasteading Institute, which is a nonprofit that explores the idea of creating sovereign ocean colonies, and also Protomous Capital, a venture capital firm that's building experimental cities in developing countries. So, but that's not really all. In his spare time, when he's not planning to build new cities on floating nations, he's advising us here at the Standard.io DAO and helping us to build the next gen decentralized stablecoin and 0% interest borrowing. So if you thought your family had high expectations, think again, because Patri comes from a lineage of deeply rooted in individual liberty, backing currency with rare assets and using market forces as governance. And really that aligns so perfectly with us philosophically. So yeah, anyway, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to the man who's not just pushing the envelope, he's building a whole new post office. Patri Friedman, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great metaphor. I mean, like people often ask me, like, in your cities, will they do X, right? Like, will Bitcoin be the currency? Will the healthcare model be this? And I'm like, whoa. Like, first, they're not my cities. I kind of came up with this modern concept, and I invest in some of them, but they're the founders' cities made as products for their citizens, and everyone might be different. Part of the idea here, let 1,000 nations bloom, is for different people to try out different things, to see what works best in building a city or a country, and because different people are going to want to live in different places. So yeah, take that metaphor.
That's really important because a lot of people, when you bring up like the concept of anarcho-capitalism, first thing they say was, how would you X? And really, if you were to answer it, you then would be saying, well, I should be dictator because I know all the answers. But really, we don't, and that's why I really love what you've really dedicated your life to, is creating these startup cities where competition really allows for the best to bubble up to the top, because that's what we've seen work in free markets.
Yeah, I mean, one angle in what I'm doing is trying to create a market for governance. And I actually have two generative metaphors that I use again and again. One of them is law as code, and the other is governments as businesses. And so I view kind of the global market for governance, meaning countries offering packages of services and laws to citizens. And it's a market with basically no startups. Where it's really hard to edit the code bases. Even if you get elected president of the United States, like you only get to make little changes to the executive parts of the laws. It's got a really high barrier to entry. To start to compete, you need to be able to start a new country. Even winning an election won't do it. And it's just a market with very little competition. And so my answer is, let's do the things that make more competition, and that will and allowing startup governments that will encourage people to create new things that work better. And so I'm not advocating on the line of specific regulations. I'm not advocating on the level of even specific legal or political systems. I'm what to me is kind of one step deeper, which is deeper, although I went higher. I got to let go of the outgoing next. Which is change the global government industry so that people try a bunch of new legal and economic systems, which then produce different and better regulations.
It's such a rabbit hole that you open up, because as soon as you think of competing governance, so many questions come to mind. Where are you starting out? Like, what are the big projects right now? I know the one in Honduras is quite interesting. Where are you at with everything? What's the
Yeah,
state of
we've made,
the
yeah, yeah, I think we've made around 8 investments, and we'll actually soon be launching the first company that we're starting ourselves based on our kind of experience and contacts. And yeah, where we're at is I closed the first charter city fund in late 2019. So we've been investing for a few years, getting towards the tail end of this fund, and we work with anyone in the space, really, especially founders and investors, and just try to help them make this all happen. This, it's a massive, massive vision. It's going to take a lot of people and a lot of time, and we make investments in the kind of earliest stage, like pre-seed and seed usually, occasional Series A companies, and then we try to help them succeed.
crazy? So, like,
And I guess to
where would
add, as you mentioned, Honduras. So there, the number of charter cities right now is one. So by our definition of a modern charter city, which is an area that has substantially different laws and institutions than the rest of the country. And Dubai International Financial Center is an example of this. But the ones that we invest in are generally for profit and run by a private company, not by Dubai, as in Dubai. And yeah, and so there's one, Honduras Prospera, and we are investing in a bunch of others, collaborating on others, now starting our own. But Prospera is the only one that's gotten across the finish line.
Amazing. So if someone is interested in, like, where do you start? If someone is an entrepreneur and they're like, oh yeah, I want to try and like get funding from Protomous Capital, where like they would, I would imagine going and trying to find like a large enough section of land, making deals first, all of this stuff, or where does someone start?
Sure. I'll first say no land last. Because if you
Right.
think about it, working with countries, it's kind of like enterprise sales taken to the next level, right? Like you're talking about very large institutions, often very slow moving. And so I think it's generally foolish to expect that having one host country in your pipeline, like if you had one enterprise company in your pipeline, unless you have very, very strong reason to think it's going to happen and happen fast, is not the right approach. And so you want to scale your commitment to any given country, your time and your capital, with the commitment that country makes. I mean, kind of like you should do in any good relationship. And land is fixed in one place and it's expensive, so it comes, in my opinion, very late in the process. But what you're asking about what a founder should do, it's pretty tough right now. You got to be able to learn and figure things out yourself because the space is very inchoate. We're working on bringing out a bunch of content to help this, but it's not out yet. And so I'd encourage people to look at all the resources. We have a resources guide at protomos.vc. There's the Charter Cities Institute, and kind of read up. There's blogs and newsletters specializing it. So, I mean, investigate all of the countries. Our portfolio page has a great set of social links for all the countries, for all the companies. And that's a great way to follow along. And I was really excited when I was putting together a slide deck last year, and it was the first time I'd ever put one together that had photos of actual communities, like in the real world,
Wow.
that we'd funded and were operating. So that's really exciting. I mean, the main thing I would say to founders, which we really need to get the word out, because our greatest shortage is founders. That's our bottleneck. I mean, forever our bottleneck was countries, and now I don't even follow up on intros to ministers or whatever anymore, because we have more than enough countries to occupy us for a while. I don't have founding teams. And so what I really want founders to know is that this is not just some futuristic Peter Thiel funded vision, Silicon Valley madness. That's what it was when I started out working on it some 20 plus years ago. But right now we've gone from 0 to 1. a bunch of other companies exist or are in active negotiations with countries. There's going to be, in some cases like Ghana in Nigeria, they're already the country's first digital special economic zone. They're in what's probably Africa's most important free zone. And you'll be seeing MOUs from other projects with governments, I expect later this year. So it's happening. Like, you can build right now. Get in touch with us, and we're just really looking for proven founders. Last thing I'll say about founders is, when we started investing and people would say, what are you looking for? We'd say everything you look for in any other founder, startup founder. And that's still true. And then we would say, it's somewhat important to have strong ties and a strong network with a given country or region. It's not required, because a great partnership builder can go and build that. And, we've got the intros. But what's changed is that we said the one other skill that's pretty important is real estate development, international real estate development. And I've really changed my mind on that, because it's much more of a commodity that can be brought in later versus community building. That is the other part of it besides entrepreneurship. So these projects, I think I was fooled, because the vision for some of these is, we want to make, Prospera wants to be a Singapore for the Western Hemisphere, right? Yeah. And that's a huge vision. And that's, at that city scale, it's not so much of a hands-on community building thing. But what about the first 100 people who live there, and the first 1,000 people that sign up, or the next 1,000 people? Like, these things need to get off the ground. And at the beginning, you have to build a strong enough community that 100 or 1,000 people will go move in together, probably in another country. And I will say that there's other approaches. I think a lot of these cities will be appealing mainly to locals and people in the region, which is not as big a move and just an easier sell. And that should be most of the population. But for the many of them that are aiming to have part of the population, maybe the early population, be nomads or some community of people in the developed world, that is a hardcore community building activity. So community before real estate.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things. I mean, we've seen it with like the Free State Project. It's just really hard. You try to get people to move up there. It's been going for years and years, even before Bitcoin was there. It was trying to get people up there to New Hampshire. So, and in a way, it has succeeded, but in another way, it's not like they took over and made it some anarchic paradise. But yeah, how much do you think taxation plays, like taxation, like being able to work and build a business without like overly burdening taxation to attract the hearts and minds of entrepreneurs?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is that, look, let's use the metaphor of government as a business. So the benefits you get from the business is everything government offers, all services, security, everything. And then the cost is whatever taxes and fees you pay. Or maybe it's some mandatory military duty or civil service in some places. And so, of course, when buying a product, the price you pay is really, really important, right? I mean, like, new disruptive entrants either have to be way better on product or way better on price, ideally some degree of both. So, I know for a lot of people, taxation gets brought up as some like moral thing or immoral thing, depending on your perspective. But, one of the things I love about thinking about citizens as consumers is that it takes a lot of the emotion out of it, where it's so frustrating to be like, my government is acting in this wrong way. It's not according to my ethical principles. Like, I think it's just bad for us to be in that, kind of anger and resentment, whether or not it's true. And if you think of yourself like, man, I'm a customer and I hate this product. Like, I hate other products too. This really sucks. And so it's just the price that you pay for the product. And the other thing that's really changed my mind about taxation, I used to be very, very skeptical of, is that for a for-profit company operating a region, the profit model is generally rent plus taxes. So, and in both of those cases, you're basically building GDP and then collecting a share of it. So it's like a rev share in the economy of the city. You know, a lot like a lot of business models. If you facilitate transactions and then take a fee, it's the same thing of getting a cut of the value that you produce. And in fact, it's an equity cut in a sense. If you say have a 7.5% tax rate, the minimum needed to not be a tax haven under the OECD, then you get 7.5% of all economic activity, right? And that means that there's some fraction, it's not quite even, where if you can, you know, spend $1 to generate about $14 of economic activity or more, then the company makes a profit. And it's not perfect incentive alignment, but it's pretty good. And so, you know, as I see it, the company should be collecting taxes to incent it to grow GDP. And it's just the price that you're paying.
Yeah, I mean, I could see if it was named like, you know, a subscription cost rather than a
government
tax.
as a service.
Yeah, yeah, and in terms of, you know, because it's a lot easier to vote someone that you don't like out than it is to move your whole family somewhere else.
Not for me. I mean, look, I'm a libertarian. Libertarians generally get a few percent in, say, presidential campaigns. Of all the legislators, there's a few, you know, a few out of hundreds who could be called libertarian. I literally cannot vote my candidates in. Basically, never have been able to, and I expect I probably never will be able to. And that's part of what brought me to this. So yeah, it's easy to vote, but your vote almost never changes the outcome. And it's a lot harder to move, but you actually get the difference. You can actually determine if you go into a supermarket, you get to decide what food you get, right? Totally different than voting. And you know, that difficulty of switching, that limits the degree to which we're making the market more competitive with startups, but it's still a heck of a lot better than what's existed, you know, in the last few hundred years.
That's amazing. I really love that analogy, and it is true. It is true. When you actually move, you get what you want because you can move where you want. Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing. Actually, the original American, or the USA, having the different states and having them be very different to each other, that you have more choice rather than one sort of you know, monopoly on law from the feds.
Yeah, I'll give a great example of competition between the states. So hardly anyone knows this, but it's mentioned in a paper by Brad Taylor and I. Of the first 13 colonies, there was only a few that had women's suffrage before it was an amendment. And of the frontier colonies, it was something like 10 of the next 12 that had suffrage because, you know, frontier needs families, families need women, and it was a way to appeal to that customer base that was underserved by the original colonies. So it was actually a huge factor in female suffrage coming to the United States, was that those states tried it and they saw that the disastrous predictions that some people made, you know, out of ignorance, not being able to stretch their mind, right, to this new possibility, however similar to the old possibility it was, and competitive governance let people show that it worked and adopt it incrementally until it became adopted for the whole country.
And that's stunning. That's really, really interesting, isn't it? I wonder, in terms of the Prospera, for instance, what incentives do you see as the high ones in that case? Like, that's low-hanging fruit for a startup city, but would be would be very valuable for people wanting to move there and be those early adopters.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sort of torn because concrete examples really help, but you know, people so often seem to have this idea that there's kind of like the killer law, you know, like a killer app, and people will be like, well, what is it exactly that you want to be able to do in these cities that you can't do? And look, we're talking about having an entire legal system that is, you know, in the case of Prospera, based on the same British common law traditions, but they looked at countries around the world. They looked at what jurisdictions had the best regulations in each of the different areas, and they did their best to combine them. And so when you have, different regulations from anywhere in the world, if done right, kind of the best from each place in the world, that's obviously going to be better than each country in a bunch of different ways. And you have fair and honest courts, and in general, a government that's small enough that you can directly work with them if the laws kind of don't work for your product, or if you're a group of citizens coming in and you want different laws, you can directly work with this stakeholder company really directly. And so to me, it's not about anyone. One really cool one in Prospera that's just fun because, look, I mean, those of us in the 2000s, to some degree, we were trying to create some kind of cyberpunk, future, snow crash, things like that. Even though for me, it was all about making it real. Like, I wanted to build someplace that I could live, that matched my values and that was well run. But you can go and get your genes edited at a company called MiniCircle on Prospera. They're in early FDA trials. They're doing their trials with people who come there to get gene editing. And there's, I think, the one that I'm thinking about getting, it's called follistatin, and it makes your muscles bigger. So it's related to myostatin, which is that thing that if you take it out in mice, they're just like bulgingly, disgustingly huge. It's just something in the body that turns down muscle growth. That's what it does. Okay. So if you remove a little of what's turning down muscle growth, you get more muscles. I know someone who did it, who rigorously tracks all of his calories, and he gained several pounds of lean muscle mass with no change in his diet. And they have lots of other ones under development, but and I'm only considering the follistatin one because I know a number of careful people, including in biotech, who say, this is legit and I'm thinking of getting it myself. Because for me, the idea of going to one of these cities that I've invested in and like getting my genes edited, like that alone sounds so fun that I know I'm just going to want to do it no matter what and not think the safety. So
you're a braver man than I. You're a braver man than I. That's amazing. Yeah, but there could be so many really important things where people think, well, my family have all got this gene that causes a certain type of cancer or whatever. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that someone might think, oh, maybe there's a solution for that or whatever. Yeah, amazing. In terms of services for Prospera, are you guys looking for founders that are, let's say, really want to develop a better, I don't know, like a conflict resolution company or something like that, where if there is conflict, rather than going to the courts, you have these sort of resolution companies?
No. This is one of the questions we get asked a lot is that company will come to me and say, hey, we're doing this part of upgrading governance for the 21st century. We're thinking of selling to your charter cities first. I'm like, first of all, that's charter city. And, it's got, I think, about 100 people who live there in Prospera and 1,000 people directly or indirectly employed, which is great. And they're just getting started. First multi-story tower is going to roll out in the next few months, but it's not a market, right? Think about the difference between the size of engineering team you can have selling to one small company versus selling to cities and governments around the world. It's just totally wrong. And now I think that charter cities, especially as there are more of them, they're going to tend to put together their stack from much newer things than other cities. Of course, they're startups and they're agile. I generally discourage them from using the newest things that are unproven, because I believe that if your startup depends on generally getting more than one thing right, certainly getting a number of things right, you have to multiply those chances of success together. It ends up being basically zero. But I think these cities will be the first to adopt stuff that's kind of just getting proven. So I really encourage people doing any of this kind of tool stuff, sell into the market that's a million times bigger first, and then
Right.
yeah, we'll be early adopters.
Yeah, yeah. So how do conflicts currently get resolved on Prospera?
So these cities are generally using arbitration. It's just a built-in global court system where you can get your experienced judges without having to spin it up yourself. And then arbitrators are going to use the laws of that jurisdiction. And I think has their own dispute resolution software, but there hasn't been much scale in disputes yet, because most of the time, most people are not having disputes. So, I think that there's some decent software out there. I mean, I invested in one a long time ago. There's a bunch of stuff out there, and it doesn't have to be amazing to serve the purpose.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I wanted to quickly sort of change direction a little bit while we've got you here. You come from a great lineage of great thinkers in terms of economic theory, and as we're coming into this new world where, for some people the AI stuff isn't new, but for some people it's really hit them in the head, like, whoa, it can draw amazing imagery in any style. Wow, it can write scripts, it can this and that, it's a translation engine, and they start to think, wow, I can use this and double my productivity, triple my productivity. And then maybe that tripling of productivity, do you think that is just making more output, or do you think that there'll be less people employed due to the fact that I just don't need to hire an artist or a translator now for a particular job? I can just just quickly knock one out, and that's the end of it. And what happens then? Like, I'd like to explore economic theory on that front, because it's something that's been talked about, and the UBI stuff gets pumped out all the time, but I kind of feel that we've seen just those stimmy checks during the COVID and what kind of massive inflation we saw from that, just that alone. So yeah, I'd love to hear your take on the future of economies, basically. Just a small question there, Patri.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, it's the AI age has sort of started, the age of useful AIs, and that's really interesting. And I just have this very not middle of the road position, but I don't know. I find myself often seeing a middle that reflects both sides, and I don't know. I think it's wisdom. You can call it indecision, but in the AI case, to me, the high level is pretty easy. So before now, as economically literate people know, it has always been the case that when technology removed some jobs, it made more. And the reason is that the economy works by patterns of specialization and trade. That's Arnold Kling's term. And when some of those patterns, some jobs or industries go away, like, there's an infinite number of possible things that humans can do, with our kind of highly capable and general intelligence, to specialize in trade. And as the economy changes, there's short-term disruption, of course, because we have to reskill, we have to find patterns, just sit there executing them. And this is part of the role of the entrepreneur, right? Like, startups are, hey, the world has changed, technology has changed, let's find new types of jobs. And that's why kind of I see entrepreneurs as so important in the economy. So that's the way it has been. And, basically kind of all predictions going the opposite have been wrong and should by economic theory be wrong. And I very carefully said humans can always find new jobs because of our general intelligence and capability. And there's a strong case to be made that if not now, soon, we may get to the point where AIs have enough general intelligence that they will be able to, not only take over something humans are doing today, but be better than humans at some, then be better than some percentage of humans who are, maybe lower in education and opportunity, better at them than almost everything, except for fundamentally, in-person things that can't be done by a robot. Like, I don't know, maybe service at a nice restaurant or massage. No, they're going to be better at massage too. And then when the price on an AGI is lower than, a living wage for most people, now you have kind of the first situation in history where that argument is no longer true. And we're not sure about that. It could be that with the massively increased productivity, that whatever jobs humans still care about being done by humans, what we'll pay humans to do, and we'll still be okay. That may be the case, but I think for the first time, it's not guaranteed. So we kind of live in interesting and uncertain times from that perspective. I also the futurist in me feels like this is such a short-term thing. Like, I think people are thinking as though, okay, the system has changed from being like this to being like this. Now we have AIs, they're doing lots of things, they're very productive, they're displacing humans. But, whether you believe in AI doom or, AI bringing us the promised land, to me, it's just an incremental and not that long path from here to greater than human intelligence. And I know a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around that. But if you just think, well, whatever we have now could be run 10 times faster. It could be run 100 times faster. That's how computers are. Once you get compute efficient enough and you get parallel processing and throw enough computers at it. And so whatever intelligence they are, they could be reacting 100 times faster than a human or putting 100 times as much thought into it. And, an LLM at 100x, no, that's not going to be smarter than a human yet, I don't think. But now that we see that this stuff is real, the version that comes 10 years from now, I mean, look at how fast LLMs are evolving. Maybe something that combines an LLM with other types of reasoning systems that are strong in the areas where it's weak. I think we're not that far from something that starts to approach human intelligence. And then, so I think we have a status quo bias because the smartest thing any of us have ever seen is a human, and that defines our entire concept of what's possible in intelligence. And that there's just absolutely nothing where that is some kind of limit. And this is the point of the 100x example, is that people can at least stretch their heads around the idea that with improvement, the AI will get to, near or at human level. Then most people can see, wait a second, if it was there and it had 100 times as much time to think in every reaction, then it would be smarter. Or maybe you have 100 diverse AIs that have been trained in somewhat different ways and use somewhat different methods that form a committee together. And so, rather than going 100 times as fast, it's 100 different voices thinking and exploring. So, to me, this is a liminal period. And, what comes, it's not like, what's the structure? Does UBI work or something to put us on a sustainable footing for the future, right? And I don't know, in 50 years, it could easily be less, but in 50 years, these points are going to be totally moot. 2 generations, maybe 1 generation.
But don't you think we should be at least thinking about it? Like, I feel like there's this sort of intellectual laziness amongst economists at the moment, where we're on the right, well, on the left side, they're like, UBI, that's the answer, throw it out, it works, it's perfect, which is really just another word for sort of communism or socialism. This is socialism 2.0. And then on the right, it's like, well, there's always been jobs, there'll always be more jobs. And I resonate with that a lot more. And I agree that is a possibility and that things just get faster. But if I look back through time and I see that humans before the Industrial Revolution were on farms and they were really laboring, and then when industry came along and sort of disrupted that, their bodies became not as useful, so then they went and used their minds more within the cities and used their brains and creativity more. And now this brains and creativity is being taken. It's very fascinating, and I think blockchains and stuff have a part to play in this. I gave a great a talk at a great conference at the Frankfurter School of Economics about the idea of that we've seen that blockchains can issue new currency, and people actually take it seriously, and people actually add value to it, vis-a-vis Bitcoin. But I'm scared if we have a universal basic income that's controlled by the state or a government, that then people become slaves to that, because if the government stops you feeding you, then you put on a uniform and start to fight for that. So I really feel like this time is a time where all great minds within economic thinking need to start really putting stuff out there, ideas out there about what we can do, and thinking outside the square. Maybe there is a blockchain that issues a certain amount and we can get around the idea of a civil attack somehow, but it gives every month a different.
I think UBI, okay, I finally get to be a little more controversial. You can't have UBI if UBI recipients have the franchise, get to vote. And there's a really fun Torch Ship trilogy, science fiction books from a very libertarian perspective, that kind of explore this, and I agree with the economics of it. And we have this with Social Security here in the U.S. It's true for pension, government pensions around the world, and it's leading to kind of economic collapse, slow motion in some countries, which is there's this general idea that a one-issue voting bloc kind of has disproportionate power, because other people will be voting on a variety of different issues, and pensioners, like, that is the dominating thing for them, is their fixed income. And so start with that, and now there's a downward spiral effect. So maybe 10% of people are on the UBI. It's higher than that in pensions already, and they're going to tend, with that voting power, to vote against decreases and vote for increases. And as that percentage grows, both who's on UBI and how much they get, a higher and higher share of government revenue goes to UBI, creating a larger and larger group of the voting bloc, and meaning that everything else that the government does, it can do less and less of. And this means either cutting services or raising taxes, both of which make the country a worse deal for everyone else, and will lead to some number of people leaving. And whatever number that is, there's now less taxes. And so, you're just going to get this cycle, or even if the UBI voting bloc is just, just making sure that it gets kept the same and doesn't get tampered with. In the case of pension funds in the world today, because the demographic pyramid is inverting, even just staying the same and not, revising them way downward, that is enough for the collapse. So, I think there's a very strong case for this downward spiral. And so my solution is simple. People who get UBI don't get to vote. And I'm suggesting this purely practically. I think otherwise the system will collapse. I don't think that they're like less than. I'm not trying to make a moral argument for this. That's just the dynamics.
It's fascinating, and because you really are looking at it from more of a game theoretical collapse of a system that needs the right incentives in place, because you're right, it just starts to head
public
towards
choice argument.
I think that there really is, like I said, so much to explore now, especially now that it's been really smacked in your face at how amazing neural networks can be. That we as a society need to really think about that and the future of that. The biggest issue I have with UBI is really because no one knows. Just like some of these blockchain projects, we don't know what works, and that's so beautiful about testing out economic theory without gulags. Just here's a blockchain, try it. And so what scares me most about it is more the poor countries, that really can't afford squat right now. They couldn't afford a UBI to even get it going. Wealthy countries could. How do you see something like Prospera, some of these startup countries dealing with this sort of idea of hyper efficiency where humans are sort of priced out of the market?
Well, I mean, I don't have a specific answer, but I think that as kind of more nimble and innovative, just smaller companies, even if we just put everything else aside about these startup cities, they're going to be smaller companies. I mean, I found that it's much easier to work with smaller countries. That's, the vast majority of who we talk to.
Yep.
And so there's that. And, just going back to what you're saying about less developed countries that, really can't afford that kind of thing. To me, the main impact and case for charter cities today is for economic development. And, I'll be honest, that's not why I got into them. I didn't want to work on kind of a new method for economic development. Nothing wrong with that. That's just not my thing. I wanted to build a city that I would want to live in. And so my kind of vision is more about how can we find way better political and economic systems that are as much better than democracy as democracy was, was much better than constitutional representative democracy as it was than monarchy and the other things that came before. That's what I want. But product market fit today is, like Prospera does, is bringing best practices from around the world with honest, efficient courts to places where they don't have that, because reform is really, really hard. All right, it's incredibly hard to reform, a governance system and institutions that aren't working well. And so part of the idea of charter cities is they're this incremental solution that says, okay, instead of reforming for a large number of people, we take empty land and people opt into it. And you're able to do something much more radically different in that case. And the main impact of that is economic development. I mean, one version of our mission statement was starting cities that, uplift the country economically and eventually the whole region. You can look at Hong Kong as having done this. Both the threat of people exiting and people getting entrepreneurial knowledge led China to kind of create not just Shenzhen, but all of these special economic zones that brought some degree more free markets and uplifted more people out of poverty than has ever happened before in history. So that's an incredible example of how a charter city can have a huge effect on the region. So that's kind of the main thing, is giving people better jobs.
Yeah, it truly is like these seeing the rise of even Dubai, when you look through books of how quickly that has arrived. Like you look at books just from the 70s or the 80s or even the 90s, and you're like, there was one building there.
It's incredible. It's incredible. I don't want the same I don't have sort of the same culture, and I want somewhat different rules than they have. But I think that, well, that Dubai and Singapore are the best run places in the world, and Dubai is, I'd say, the most entrepreneurial. Singapore's made a ton of money, but I think just because they grew an incredible economy, not because they were trying to profit maximize, but they were just trying to make a great city state, and that resulted in a lot of profit.
Do you think that it started off with someone similar as you that decided, hey, let's do Singapore, or was it more of a, I don't really know the history of some of these.
I mean, I would not dare to compare myself to Lee Kuan Yew. He's probably the best head of state of the last 100 years. So it was a specific person who helped lead the country into independence and ran the country for decades. Because Singapore, it's a democracy, but one party basically dominates, perhaps because Singapore is so small, perhaps because that party does a really good job. And I think, I mean, to me, it's a downside that there's such a strong founder effect, because that makes it harder to replicate. It means you can't just copy it. But he set this incredible culture of civil service excellence, more like the Chinese Mandarin system than how it's done in most places, paying people in civil service significantly more and having it be prestigious, very, very anti-corruption. So he was high integrity and spread a culture of high integrity. As a byproduct, I think it's the opposite of what Xi is doing in China right now, where he does not want any competent leaders kind of anywhere in his top people, which is obviously makes for a very fragile system. And LKY, just as part of running the country well, nurtured lots of other leaders of lots of other things. He was incredibly pragmatic. So people of different political beliefs look at him and say, wow, this is really great. He did not have fully privatized healthcare. He did not have fully public healthcare. He tried to look at the details and craft something that was a good mix of both. And he did that for everything. So just an absolutely incredible person. And what Singapore taught me, I used to say, hey, I want to make a city that fits my values. And I've changed that. Now I say, I want to have a city that fits my values and is operated well. And I changed that because it turns out, for me at least, that when I go to some place like Singapore, that a higher tax rate and more government services, it doesn't bother me if the extra money is actually turning into a way better product, right? A lot of what I don't like is being, forced to pay this price for services that don't even close to deserve that price, in my mind. It certainly doesn't cost that much to produce. And so when a country has effective safety nets, effective subsidies in new industries, it seems like much less of a problem to me. And, I'd still want to fall, probably like well towards the low tax side of the spectrum. I'd rather have unbundling of government services and more competition. But I realize that the quality of a place to live depends on just how well it's run as much as what the values are. I mean, just think of it this way. If a place had my values but was shoddily run, well, it wouldn't actually be implementing my values. It wouldn't be a good place to live. Like a place that was full of corruption, regardless of the stated values, would not be libertarian.
So do you think transparency plays a big role in that, like in terms of where are my taxes going? Because it seems like if you got taxed a lot, maybe you wouldn't mind if you knew, okay, it directly went, this is the budget and this is what happened, and there was no new like money printing or there was, or
I certainly think it helps transparency and maybe even some degree of influence over where at least some of your tax dollars go. I think would go a long way. But to me, even without transparency, ultimately it's, am I getting something that feels totally worth that price, right? Even if I don't see the details of, because think about it, like we want to see the details of how it's being spent when it's clearly being misspent. And it would seem like it's being spent pretty well. I'm much more willing to, that's their business.
Well, especially with competing services, like if Netflix just hasn't got the things that I want to watch, I'll just stop paying on that monthly basis and move over to, I don't know, like Disney Plus or whatever. Like it's, if you start to really twist your mind to those new ways of thinking as a service, I think it's just such a really great, and it's not the biggest mind shift, is it? to go from, hey, I live here and I'm taxed, to, hey, I live here, I'm subscribed to these services, and they're just not worth it anymore. So I'm just going to pack up and go.
Yeah.
Well, it's been really wonderful catching up, Patri. I really appreciate your time, and I know you're always really busy. And it's been a long time since we've caught up between calls. I do definitely want to jump on a call with you about the standard and get your advice on where we're going with that. We're very, very close to launching, so I feel really blessed to have you so close on that circle to give us advice, and I don't use it enough. So I would definitely love to do that sometime soon, just to get your feedback on that. But thanks for coming on the show and really enlightening the audience about what you're doing. You're definitely one of the great minds of this of the era that we're all living through. Someone that reaches for the stars and has a great circle of people around them as well to help that vision. So yeah, thanks a lot, Patri.
Thanks so much. That's very kind of you, and thanks for having me on.
No worries. If anyone wants to stay in touch with you, where do they go?
I'd say best is Twitter. My Twitter is @Patrissimo, PATRISSIMO, and then the fund Twitter is @pronomos.vc, PRONOMOS.vc. Pronomos means towards good law.
Nice. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Have the best day, and I'll see you around the interwebs.
Excellent. See you around.
Ciao. Yeah, thanks a lot, Patri. That's great.
No